We just had a significant amount of rain last night and today, and so I wanted to put a little bit of work. I've been doing drainage work around the property, but I thought I would take a look at how water moves through this particular high tunnel down by the road. This is a space where we start seedlings for the nursery and grow out some certain crops during the summer, hold over some plants. It has the redirection of the overflow of our rainwater collection, and right now there's a significant amount of excess water in the walkway. It's an opportunity to hydrate the beds. Pardon the mess in here, but that'll be part of what I'm working on. I want to get this water so that it can wick better into the beds. I want to widen and deepen the beds, hydrate them, harvest some of the old compost over there, and make more use out of this space. Let me start with where this water is coming from. Basically, there's an old scavenged hose on the west end of this high tunnel that's slightly buried under wood chips, and it follows it's all the way back around the old woodshed there, back up around and to those rainwater tanks. In fact, it's this hose right here which has been crushed over the years, so it flows very, very slowly. I'll have to replace this at some point, but right now I've got that valve completely open and I want to drain these tanks. It's going to get freezing again. This is all from the rain that came in the last 24 hours, and so all of this water will slowly work its way down through this tube freely, slowly, and around and back around, and like I described with my finger, past the mess and over to that high tunnel. With well over 500 gallons of water slowly working its way into this high tunnel, there's an opportunity to have that water do a bit more work than it's doing right now. At the moment, on the far end over here, normally it goes to this tub with a float valve that I can use that for irrigating, but the hose is open to this spot right here and weeping underneath the tunnel. And so that's where this water is coming from. It's from those rainwater tanks flowing into here. What I'd like to do is first and foremost go through these beds. There's a couple of spots where there are perennials. There's some skirt, there's some good King Henry, there's some perennial arugula that I'd like to dig out and heal in one collected area so that I can really flatten these beds out, redesign them from the ground up. I'd like to hit a full reset in here. I'd like to pick out the little bits of trash and get the strings and all this material cleaned out, basically flatten out these beds, which would then let me start harvesting some of that very, very wet, fertile muck from that far end and apply it to the beds. So let me start with that. Just a minute or two of digging here, and there is a really beautiful good King Henry and some perennial arugula showing just how strong they are at handling extremely dry, rough soil conditions. This is an abandoned space to some extent during the summer, and you can see how dry the soil is. So part of this work is getting these plants out and then reimagining how this excess water that needs to go somewhere can be wicked into these beds. So the wider these pathways are, the deeper they are, so that more water can stand and slowly wick into the beds, the better. But I really do need to clear the slate before I can do that. A few minutes of digging and the north side of this tunnel is clear to the middle, and I was able to heal in some kale and some mullein, some skirt, perennial arugula, some hidcote comfrey. They're all just tucked in right there. What I'll need to do is take a watering can and soak them down sooner than later. But the whole process in here of digging out this walkway and harvesting all of this wet muck and putting it into the bed, starting to really deepen the water holding of this pathway, will give me an opportunity to put lots more water into here and address their needs before I leave today. But all that's in just a few minutes. It's pretty amazing how fast a little shovel work can get through a system. I just broke up some of the material in the walkway, and I think what I'll do is take the coarsest, woodiest stuff, the biggest stuff, bring it out of the high tunnel. So this was in the fall. This was chop and drop of river locusts to feed the soil in here. You can see the fungal networks that were starting to grow. Those will come up into the bed, but the coarse, biggest debris I'm going to filter out and walk it over to a more coarse windrow on the outside. So this is where we dumped stalks from sunchokes and miscanthus, bigger stuff. The snow through the winter will pressure this and help break it down, and it'll slowly wick the nutrients back into the high tunnel later. So coarse material out. I've got some of that material out, and so now I can start using my feet while I'm working in here to scuff the organic matter, the soil, all the debris in the walkway, scuff it and walk around with it in the water. Like, let it start to actually really, really soak in this excess fluid. So before I dig it out and put it onto the beds, let it get to a fully hydrated state. You have to keep in mind, we don't have irrigation for this farm. We don't open up a hose and flood irrigate. Basically, this is an abundant moment of rainwater, so I'm trying to have all the material that will fill these beds take on as much as it can, all of the nutrient in the water before it goes on the bed, and make it a short commute for the water and the fertility. Another few minutes and this whole side is emptied out, so I can really move material in a rough, loose way in here, not have to worry about tiptoeing around high value plants. They are all, for the winter, healed into this corner, ready to be hydrated. Now I've got a lot of woody material and debris that's not exactly finished compost by any stretch of the imagination. I don't want to just put that right on top of this and then expect this to be ready to start seeds in the spring. So what I'd like to do is actually excavate I should say, some material from the center in here, move that older soil off to the side so that we can infill with the younger material and cover it back up with the older material. This soil movement's really worthwhile because it's showing me that about 8 inches down, the soil goes from being quite dry to a decent amount of moisture. It's accessing the water in the ground outside. So it's not an insurmountable amount of dehydration happening in these raised beds. They're not decoupled from the earth around them. It's just a matter of getting them looser and having more water sit near them to be able to gently wick up continuously. So this work should be fruitful. A little bit of a trench dug out to bury organic matter. So this walkway will be harvested up and into the bed and then covered with soil for the spring. I found a spot where some hens were hiding some eggs. I have no idea how old these are, so these will be a good opportunity to take and put down at the very bottom of this ditch as well. They'll break down over time and feed the soil, and we don't have to worry about them exploding. So I'm going to handle those very carefully, lay them in first, and then start covering with material from the walkway. It's a weird scene, but that should be functional. It's definitely sketchy moving eggs that have been in a high tunnel for question mark months, but none of them broke. Handled carefully, we'll start burying them gently, and we'll forget about them except for when they release fertility to plants next year. You can see the value of dumping the organic matter in the walkway where there's water to begin with. So we're adding hydration to this bed, and it's a chance to mix this material as well. So we'll cap those eggs. This is a one-handed move right now, but basically that's the move. Anywhere that it's dry in here, I'll kick back into water, let it hang for a bit, and then apply it to the bed. So we're basically making a rehydrated composting pile in situ. It's not big enough or hot enough to be considered a hotbed, but it should be able to slowly become red wiggler opportunity all through the winter and be beautiful by the spring and not have to dig again. By harvesting this material lower in the walkway, getting it up into the bed, you can see where it's allowing for the water that's on the far end of this space to equalize out further. So in other words, we're expanding the feeling of this swale, of this water distribution. Pardon the shakiness. I'm holding with one hand while digging with the other, but you can see here is a nice fruitful scoop. One more. Let me just move that off to the side. And you can see that water wanting to rush down this way. So the deeper and wider I can get this, the more that the water will be able to sit up against the boundaries of these beds and passively hydrate them. Every time there's snow that thaws, every time there's rain, these beds will have water that can wick right into them. This is where the project starts to move quickly because it's not that much digging to reveal that water. So I'll go through and get the whole thing equalized so that water can sit up against this bed. It's a huge amount of material to fill the bed with. I'll need more capping soil for this to be a seed bed in the spring, but luckily with our chickens, there is a lot of compost in the chicken yard that is very rich, really needing to leave. And yeah, it has some weediness in there, but we can get that loaded into the high tunnel, hydrated, let the weeds start to sprout, and then work them over from there. Either let them grow for a bit or weed them out and grow something else. But we've got fertility to cover that with more soil as needed. So digging out that walkway, getting it into the bed, capping it with some compost should all be able to help it transition to being ready in the spring. The important thing that I want to note here is that I'm doing this well in advance of when we need it. In other words, it's mid-December right now. I won't think about seeding into here until around February. Sometime around then, we'll reassess this compost heating system. I think today, once this is all done, I'll take the board off and allow it all to fall into the water so it can really soak and hydrate. We can move that compost somewhere, but get the compost heating system set up, you know, early February, mid-February, get this resolved and figured out and seeded by mid-February, late February, early March, get some low tunnels in here. We've talked about that before. But the idea is to do these things in slow, iterative steps. A little bit today, half hour, 45 minutes, rather than like a 2-day massive work project. But just to get this water equalizing has huge benefit for it to passively hydrate. For the duration of those large rainwater tanks slowly losing their water down that crimped, sluggish flowing hose, this space should be able to equalize the entirety of that water amongst these two garden beds. The priority being this northern bed. By digging away material here, the water can sit there and slowly wick its way into that soil, watering from the bottom. This needs some soil on top, it needs some compost on top, but that can be for later. And for now, we've got this Chinampa's looking system of water for a walkway. Now, this would be a miserable thing if we had to manage this on a daily basis for a market garden or what have you, but this is basically a pulse moment with excess water being released from a rainwater tank. After a few days, this water will have bled into the soil, or better yet, been wicked laterally into these beds. This will be moist and muddy, but not too bad, and we can refill it with a very coarse wood chip or stone, or just leave it as is and renovate. I think I might also open up this today just to get that really dry material into the water while it's here, and I can always harvest it out later and turn this water into really, really nutrient rich material, since that's aged compost in the middle. Clearing out this side revealed a bit more rich soil, which I was able to use to cover this side. So just kind of rearranging materials. This definitely is nowhere near ready for seeding in the spring, but it didn't need to be today. It's kind of amazing how dry it is in there. It's a lesson learned. It needs to be way more hydrated with these compost heating systems, especially through the summer. So I'm just going to knock it all into the water and let it sit. That'll be the end point for today for sure, and let it just hydrate over the next few days. That's a good stopping point for today. Come back to this later on.